we're live. All right. Hi, and welcome to Read Reviews, the podcast where we talk about a variety of books from a Marxist and anarchist perspective. And I'm joined, as usual, by my co-host, Justin Clark. Thanks for joining me, Justin.
Hi, Corey. It's good to be here. We are recording this on election night in the U.S.
Yeah.
I voted today. Hopefully this will be a nice respite for those who are, biting their fingernails off, worried about this election. We won't go into it very much, but I will say we talked a little bit about it in the pregame.
Yeah.
Which you can listen if you become a patron. Patreon.com/skeptical leftist. But I will say just briefly that, recognize that all of us are a part of much bigger structures and systems than we have control over. This is out of your hands. And regardless of whatever happens, we pick ourselves up, we dust ourselves off, and we fight for a better day and for a better world. Right. So that's the hopeful message. This is the hopeful part I'm going to get through tonight. That's part of what we're going to be talking about tonight is the notion of hope. I think hope might be one of the most revolutionary ideas. And that's different from optimism.
Yeah.
Optimism is sort of this Panglossian sort of inevitability of things being better. That's kind of what optimism is, right? Like this sort of Steven Pinker view of the world of like, today's the best day ever, tomorrow will be better. Some of that's true in some context for certain specific reasons, but that's not true generally. And in a lot of ways, there are other things that are objectively worse than they were yesterday or the day before, a year ago, or 10 years ago. But what hope is hope is believing in values that are universal, that transcend the sort of petty parochialisms of our given time and place. It's a perspective that has us fighting for a better world in spite of what may come. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a message that is very important, especially in an era we live in now where it feels like there's so much going wrong. And, we have an economic order that is leaving the majority behind. You have a political system which seems so bought and paid for by the ruling class that feels so disconnected from the concerns of everyday people, where the options are so limited and the potential for change is so slight that it kind of gives people a sense of like resignation to it, a sense of apathy, or even a sense of nihilism. And my hope with talking a little bit about this tonight is that we kind of fight back against that paradigm and recognize that humanity it's all about the long game. I think that this was the Marxist Moshe Postone who once said, it took us centuries to get in this mess and may take us centuries to get out.
Yeah.
Having said that, though, we may not have time. And that's why it's so important to advocate for a better world. And with that in mind, I think that's why I picked the book tonight, which was also a subject of my talk that I gave this past Sunday at the Heartland Unitarian Universalist Church here near Indianapolis. I speak to their group regularly, and the talks always become essays, and so and hope is a major component of that. So tonight, the book that we're discussing is a book called "The Revolution of Hope Toward a Humanized Technology" by Erich Fromm.
Cool.
Now, we've covered Erich Fromm on the show before, so this will be in some ways a spiritual sequel to the episode that we did on, I believe, Marxist Concept of Man, which was the other book that we did, where we talked about Marxist humanism. So that was very theoretical, and this will be theoretical too, but that was sort of the broader outline of what Marxist humanism is and how to conceptualize a humanist reading of Marx. What this book is, in many ways, is sort of application of those broader Marxist humanist principles.
Okay.
So for those who didn't watch the previous one, Erich Fromm was a psychologist. He was a sociologist, and he wrote a variety of different books and was very influential in the 20th century in developing the sort of Marxist humanist tradition of which I'm a part of, along with other people like Leszek Kolakowski and Ernst Bloch and Raya Dunayevskaya and others who sort of offered this alternative vision, because in the world at the time, especially in the mid 20th century, there was sort of this strict binary where it was either you supported the capitalist United States or you supported the really existing socialism, the Soviet Union.
Right. Yeah.
And the Marxist humanists were sort of rejecting that binary and rejected that dichotomy. And Fromm was one of them. Fromm was very critical of the way that the Soviet Union, as we've talked about in previous episodes, kind of devolved into a deeply, state capitalist society where it was deeply regimented. And it did expand human freedom in some specific ways, whether it was, universal employment or certain forms of social benefits and all of that, which in terms of economic development helped millions of people. And I don't think we can discount that. But I think at the same time, it was also in a political system that was deeply rigid. That was also deeply dogmatic and unwilling to sort of evolve with the times and change, and became very ossified. And I think you get a sense that there was a sort of inertia within that system, much like we have today. I think in the sort of late capitalist world that we live in now, and especially the United States, it feels like that same kind of inertia, or at least it gives the appearance of that same kind of inertia that the Soviet Union had, especially in the last 10 to 20 years of its existence. But Fromm was born in Frankfurt, Germany in 1900. He died in 1980. So he lived for the majority of the 20th century. And he was sort of this voice of the 20th century. He was sort of a sort of a reflection of the 20th century. And probably his most famous books are The Art of Loving, which is probably his most famous book, which isn't like crazy political, but has some political overtones. But it's his like philosophical discussion on love, which I've also written about, and you can check that out on my website. Oh. But his other book is called Escape from Freedom, which is this big book, kind of talking about how the regimentation and the amalgamation of social and technological forces in the 20th century brought forth an era of conformity and an era of homogenization and social reaction. And that book, Escape from Freedom, is a book that sort of explores, much like Hannah Arendt's The Origins of Totalitarianism, or Theodor Adorno's book on fascism. I think that one's called The Authoritarian Mind or whatever. I forget exactly the Adorno book. But these are all kind of written around the same time. And Fromm comes out of the environment of other Marxists, of what they call the broader Frankfurt School, although he's different from them in a lot of ways. So the Frankfurt School were a variety of different Marxist scholars in the mid-20th century who fled Germany during the rise of the Nazis, and many of them either went to Europe or they went to the United States. And Fromm went for a time to Europe, and then he also went to the United States. But those are people like Theodor Adorno, Max Horkheimer, Herbert Marcuse. But anyway, yeah. So there's this whole school of people who are challenging, again, those existing paradigms of Marxist scholarship, especially in the era of the Soviet Union. And Fromm was too. And so that's kind of what Escape from Freedom is about. It's sort of exploring like how does a totalitarian system, whether it's fascism or state socialism or sort of Soviet communism, how does it take form, and how does it sort of how does it change people and build a system in which people sort of accept it. And I think that's something to think about today in the context of Trump and the rise of the far right around the world and all that. It's like, why would people readily escape this? Yeah. Why would they readily accept this, rather? And it's in the title, right? Escape from Freedom. It's this idea that there's some impulse within us psychologically that sort of wants to give it up to a larger figure, right? Parent, God, political figure, whatever. Okay. And in doing so, we sort of exchange our freedom for this sort of sense of security. And I think that's really the challenge of the 20th century, was that balance between freedom and security. And I think it's the challenge we still experience today. Yeah. But what The Revolution of Hope is about is it's his book on technology. And So we've done many episodes of the podcast talking about the implications of big tech. We talked about Cory Doctorow and Rebecca Giblin's book,
Yep.
Chokepoint Capitalism. We've talked about techno-feudalism with Yanis Varoufakis. We've talked about these different aspects. Fromm is giving you a much more fundamental sort of theoretical conception of why we might be in the place we are technologically.
Okay.
But I think for us to set the stage, it would be important for us to kind of figure out exactly, well, where we are at this moment in relationship to tech. But before I do that, do we have any comments? Anybody?
Nothing yet. No.
Okay. I figured that may be the case since it's like election night.
Yeah. A lot of people probably watching the election.
Probably watching the election. Yeah. This is very good for me just to get my brain off of it. So I guess but anyway, yeah. So we are really at I think, crucial period of history with the rise of these large tech firms that have become so divorced from not only what people's needs are, but also just from like economic and environmental realities.
Yeah.
As I write in kind of my essay, I talk a little bit about how, we've basically given over the internet to 5 major companies: Amazon, Apple, Google, Meta, Google or Alphabet, Meta, and Microsoft. Meta being Facebook. They have incredible amounts of power, and some have been deemed a monopoly in the case of Google.
Yeah.
And these sort of problematic aspects, whether it's the merging of the sort of defense industry, the military industrial complex in America with Silicon Valley, the fact that people like Jeff Bezos and Amazon, the Amazon Web Services, they have such lucrative contracts with the Department of Defense. The fact that Elon Musk is so tied to the American government via SpaceX and also with the Department of Defense. So you're seeing big tech moving away from its sort of what I would call a critical libertarianism, where it's more of we don't trust these sort of big institutions to do things. We have to do them ourselves.
Now they are the big institutions.
Now they are the big institutions.
Yeah.
And so it's and they've often spoken very candidly about how much they don't really care about democracy very much, especially people like Peter Thiel. But the other part of it too is just thinking about generative AI, and why generative AI has become sort of the fad of the moment, because it is. I mean, I think it's kind of a fad. It's not to say that it will go away completely. It won't.
Yeah,
but it is.
I'm kind of hoping that all the extraneous stuff will disappear and like just the real useful stuff will stick around.
That's the hope too, right? Because that was what was because if the past is prologue, right? That's usually how it goes.
Yeah.
So we are in an era now that people generally call Web 3.
Yeah.
So Web 1 is the development of the World Wide Web and the development and the privatization of the internet and the emergence of the deregulated open internet system that we developed in the mid-1990s. So Telecommunications Act of 1995 privatizes the internet. Basically, these public pipes, which had been set up for the use of the internet, were given over to private companies. I think we covered this in Ben Tarnoff's book, Internet for the People.
Yep.
And so from 1995 to about 2001 was Web 1, where it was the development of e-commerce. So out of this era comes companies like Amazon, Netscape, which was a very successful web browser, which again, Yahoo. But Netscape is interestingly enough, because it was one of the earlier web browsers that I remember using as a kid. But like many things with Silicon Valley, Netscape was developed with public money, and it was originally a internet, a World Wide Web interface platform developed by public institutions, and it was called Mosaic. But anyway, so you had Web 1, and Web 1 kind of collapses. You have the dot-com bubble. Some of this might be, it wasn't a little before my time. I was a very young person when this all happened. I was like 10, 11 years old. But for those who may be younger, may don't remember this, but there was a time where around 2000, 2001, where everybody was setting up a website and they all just had like super high valuations, despite the fact that they weren't necessarily helpful or useful.
Yeah.
And then that bubble burst with the credit crunch that happens in 2001, and you have a minor recession, and the bubble kind of bursts, and a lot of companies go away. And out of the wreckage comes really the the big three of the big five, Amazon, Google, and Meta,
Right.
Facebook. And that's Web 2. Web 2 is basically, for me, that's like the high school, college years, where Web 2.0 is all about the development of social networking, the development of multimedia platforms.
Right.
So Web 2 is about YouTube, iTunes, the development of the iPhone, smartphones in general. They're all Web 2. And now we live in an era which people are broadly calling Web 3. So the internet, so the big tech is kind of looking for its next big thing. They've tried many different things, and many of them have not been successful.
Yeah.
So first, it was cryptocurrencies. That was going to be the next big thing. Yeah. And then that didn't quite happen, right? It's not gone, but it's not quite happened, right? Although the crypto bros are spending millions to try to elect Trump, and Trump has become extremely, extremely more cozy with them. And he's even working there. He's even branded his own cryptocurrency like marketplace or whatever.
It's kind of the last gasp for him. Like at this point, crypto is basically dead.
Mm-hmm. It's a dead letter, but 2 years ago it wasn't, right? It was a huge bubble and it collapsed. And there were factors that led to its collapse, mostly the fact that cryptocurrencies don't really have, they're not useful.
Yeah.
They're just pure exchange value in like the Marxist sense. They're not useful at all. They don't serve any purpose, right?
Yeah.
And they collapsed. And then the Silicon Valley Bank collapse that happened in 2023. Obviously, the indictment and the conviction of Sam Bankman-Fried, who ran FTX, and he's going to prison because he ran a multi-billion-dollar Ponzi scheme.
Yep.
So cryptocurrency wasn't it. The next thing was NFTs, non-fungible tokens.
Which everybody who had a brain knew was fucking bullshit right away.
Absolute nonsense, right? Because because if you think about it, what is really an NFT, non-fungible token? It's like, this is the authentic JPEG. And it's like, well, what does that actually mean? Like, I mean, they don't even, and so that collapsed, right? And, it was like Paris Hilton going on Jimmy Fallon talking about the Bored Ape NFTs. And like, that was a big thing, right? Yeah. That collapses. The next thing they tried to do was VR or AR, augmented reality, virtual reality. Well, that hasn't really particularly panned out either. The problem with VR headsets, at least in my opinion, is that they're very clunky and they're unreliable. So, for example, I think that Meta has recently put out a new version of one of their augmented reality sets. Maybe Oculus may not be. And I may be completely fudging the numbers on this a little bit. So I recommend people kind of look this out for yourself a little, kind of, because I may be wrong. But I remember reading about how they had developed a VR headset that would really only have like a battery lasting of like 30 minutes.
Oh, geez.
It wouldn't last very long. And then it didn't really serve a use case. And so this was the era of the metaverse. Remember the metaverse, kids?
Yep. It lasted a whole 2 minutes.
Lasted a whole 2 minutes. Nobody had any legs. And the thing that's really fascinating to me is we live in an era of such advanced telecommunications. I mean, that's how we do this show. Yeah. I've known you for almost a decade, and I've never met you in person. We know each other this way, right?
Yeah.
Why? And this works just fine. Why on earth would we need to do a VR version where I don't have any legs and I look like a Wiimoji from 2008?
Yeah.
So that was a failure, right? And VR and AR and Apple even this year even got into the sort of AR space with their what they call the Apple Vision Pro, which was like $4,000. And the thing is, like, so you and I both wear glasses. For us, we cannot just put the Apple Vision Pro on and it works for us.
Right.
You have to buy like prescription lenses that have to be put into the Vision Pro. And then you have to buy special foam that like goes around your face. They call it I think they called it the light seal that would like fit your face. And that costs you like another $100 or whatever. So you got to be $4,000 in before that thing's even usable. Yeah. And most people talk about how, oh, it's cool. I never use it. And there's a good shot that Apple will discontinue making the Vision Pro at the end of 2024. So
it's like Google Glasses or whatever that table was that Microsoft tried to do.
Exactly.
These are all bad ideas.
Yeah, they're all terrible, right? So you have that trouble. And so they've tried all these things and they're not sticking. So they've thrown all their fucking chips in on generative AI.
Yeah.
And, for those who don't really know, what generative AI is, even if you've used it. Because first off, it's not really AI. It's
No.
not intelligent in any sense of the word. ChatGPT or these other AI products are essentially word calculators. They sort of they predict what you think the next word will be based on the previous word.
Yeah.
And so with ChatGPT as an example, you can type in a question of like, how do I put cheese on my pizza? And it'll like give you an answer or whatever.
Yeah.
But it also hallucinates. It just makes things up. So
Yep.
that's when it'll say put glue on your pizza or you can eat rocks.
Yep.
And so it has very limited use cases, for creative work. Now, you've talked about before how you've used it as sort of a brainstorming tool or an outlining tool.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think that's the end of the world, but I would argue that the environmental costs of generative AI are not worth it. I think that's really the bigger problem. So one thing that these companies, first off, as Ed Zitron's reporting has indicated, and in the reporting of many other tech writers, ChatGPT doesn't generate a profit. I think his statistic was for every dollar they gain, they spend $2.30.
Yeah.
So it's something along those lines. And the other issue is that you have to have these build outs of these massive data centers. Back in the day, we used to call them server farms, but they're called data centers now.
Yeah.
And to facilitate the demands of AI, and these have greatly exacerbated the climate crisis. So Google's emissions have grown nearly 50% in the last 5 years. Microsoft's energy use has climbed 30% in just 3 years. And then it also requires an incredible amount of water use to cool these machines down.
Yeah.
Because they don't necessarily put them in cold places. They put them in warm places, which is absurd. But as Fortune magazine reported last year, every single time a person completes between 5 and 50 queries on ChatGPT, depending on the complexity of your query and depending on your location,
right,
it uses 16 ounces of water just to do that.
Yeah.
And so while many parts of the world are, as I write, are extreme, we have extreme drought conditions, we have heat waves, and we've had catastrophic storms, Hurricane Milton recently in the United States. I just feel like this is not good. And all of this gets exacerbated. And this was the part of my speech that I gave and people laughed at, which was that was my total goal. So a month ago, I was at the Wiki North America conference that was here in Indianapolis. So it's the place where all the Wikipedians of North America who work on Wikipedia, work on Wikimedia Commons, work for the Wikipedia Foundation, they all come together to talk about Wikipedia and different things that have been going on, different projects that have been a part of it. Wikipedia is one of the last facets of what I would call the open internet. It's one of the last places. It's like Wikipedia and the Internet Archive is another one, which is kind of the last places that had the idealistic vision of what the internet was supposed to be, which was this free and open and accessible place to gain the world's knowledge rather than being an electronic mall that pisses us off all the time, which is what the internet is now.
Yeah.
But anyway, there was a pilot study that was done by researchers, Robert Cummings, Guy Kruger, Susan Nicholas, and Susan Wood. Robert Cummings presented this at Wiki North America. It blew my mind that he said this, and then he went on to say, "Oh yeah, I'm still bullish about about ChatGPT or whatever." So they did a study where they had a selection of students use ChatGPT,
right,
with what was called a Wikipedia plugin. So you'd put the Wikipedia plugin into the ChatGPT. So if you typed a query, it would give you sources based on Wikipedia.
Right.
And then they also had the control group, but they didn't have them do any of that. And it's a small study, so it's a small sample. So you would have to replicate these results. But what I found very interesting is that the overall results were that the only thing that ChatGPT with the Wikipedia plugin improved with students was their ability to use sources. Mm-hmm. So like other sources, like secondary sources or primary sources in writing a college essay,
right,
like a grammar or like an English 101 essay. Not only did it not help them figure out, but, and this is more importantly, it didn't help them figure out what sources were good to use. It just it gave them the capacity to access and interact with more sources than it would have otherwise. But it didn't help them discern which sources were better than others, and it didn't help them integrate those sources into their overall writing. So my laugh line was, why are we wasting so many precious natural resources for software that can't even improve freshman college essays? I mean, that's to me,
Yeah. That's,
and that's my big issue. Now if this was like a fun little fad, it would be like whatever. But
yeah.
Silicon Valley's gone all in on this,
Yeah. They've
and
inserted it into all kinds of things that it
yep,
really is unnecessary.
it's extremely unnecessary. And so, I follow a lot of this stuff very closely. I'm a huge fan of Ed Zitron. I listen to Paris Marx's podcast, Tech Won't Save Us. I think
Yeah.
it's essential. I think it's essential listening for understanding where we are in the world today with tech. Tech is the dominant part of our lives, I think,
Yeah.
more than almost any other aspect of capitalism. And so I think that people should check it out. If you want to learn more about data centers, Paris Marx just did a 4-part series called Data Vampires. It's all about
Really
the
good.
implications. Really, really, really good stuff. Like really good stuff. You should definitely check it out. But anyway, so I was like, well, we need a different paradigm. We need a different focus. We need a shift to a different world. How do we do that? Well, Fromm gives us a way to do that in his book, The Revolution of Hope. He wrote it in 1968, he was very supportive of Eugene McCarthy's run for the presidency. Eugene McCarthy was openly primarying sitting President Lyndon Johnson over the horrific American involvement in Vietnam. And this is essentially a manifesto. He kind of lays out what he thinks the problem is and how to get out of it. And, it opens with a quote that sounds very much like Marx, where he says, "A specter is stalking in our midst, whom only a few can see with clarity. It is not the old ghost of communism or fascism. It is a new specter, a completely mechanized society, devoted to maximal material output consumption, directed by computers. And in this social process, man himself is being transformed into a part of a total machine, well-fed and entertained, yet passive, unalive, and with little feeling." I think that's right. I mean, I think we do live in an era now where the emotions that we do experience as a result of tech are largely superficial. We'll see something that makes us mad, or we'll see something that sort of goes, "Oh, that's cute," like a cute cat or puppy or something.
Yeah.
But in general, most of the emotions that we feel are extremely manipulated. They're not genuine feelings. I don't know if the internet, like other than like maybe art that I've or literature that I've accessed through the internet, has made me feel things in the way, because like social media can make you feel a lot of different things, but it doesn't make you feel like a full person in the way that like normal everyday experience does.
I was actually talking to my counselor about this today, about how people are they're using the internet as a substitute for community, and
Yes.
it's such a superficial version of it. It doesn't have the same benefits or like it's not a social thing. You're in isolation, but you're on the internet.
Yeah, exactly. It's not, and that's not to discount communities that can be developed by the internet, right? I mean, people forget that social media didn't used to be called social media. It used to be called social networking. It was
Yeah.
a way for you to connect with friends to do things in the real world. Like that was what Facebook used to be, was a place where you would go and you would message someone, or you would put something on their wall. "Hey, you want to grab coffee this afternoon," or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
That's how it used to be. And it stopped being that in many specific ways. Part of it was the emergence of smartphones and moving to a mobile version that had the scroll that just goes on forever and ever and ever. And sort of algorithmic tailoring of content.
Yeah.
And
stuff that, instead of being just a timeline of things that are posted, it became like what are the most people looking at that you watch or what have you.
Yeah. And so it goes from being a system that is in service of human needs to being one that dictates human needs that are not decided by humans themselves. We've left a lot to systems that we don't necessarily actively have any control over, or if we do, that it's not democratic. It's not a democratic system. It's not a system that the people whose lives are affected by it get to have much of a say in what it is. And I think to me, that's a really big issue. But that's why hope is so important. So to come back to the notion of hope, he has a whole chapter in the book about hope. But I'll give you a couple quotes about it from him, which is, "Hope is a decisive element in any attempt to bring about social change in the direction of greater aliveness, awareness, and reason." So hope is so crucial to social change, period. There's no capacity for social change in making the world better without having the hope that you can. And I feel like we live in an era where a lot of people are apathetic, they're nihilistic. The kids call them doomers,
Yep.
you know? And I think doomerism, here's what I would say to people who feel that. One, I understand that emotion. I get that very much. There are days where I watch the news or I'm reading what's going on, and I feel pretty doomed. I just feel like it's all bad.
Yeah.
But it always goes back to a quote. I'm going to paraphrase it from Mr. Rogers, Fred Rogers, the great children's television host, who said, in times of trouble, look for the helpers, look for the people who help, because they're always there. And he's right. There are always people there to help.
Yep.
I was in a store today and I saw two older ladies talking with one another, and one of them had to sadly put her dog to sleep. Her dog had a lot of health problems, and that person had to put her dog to sleep. And this other woman was very kind to her and was very sweet to her and warm and welcoming and kind, and they hugged, and it was a very beautiful moment. That's what I mean by being kind to others.
Yeah.
And that sense of hope is important, but that's hope without optimism, in Terry Eagleton's phrasing, right? Dedication to hope that's not blinded by unrealistic optimism, the sort of Stephen Pinker view of the world, or self-defeating nihilism, the sort of black-pilled doomer kind of shit, right?
Yeah.
Because unrealistic optimism is fundamentally conservative. Nihilism is fundamentally conservative, right? Hope is not. I think that hope is fundamentally a progressive force.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it's a left-wing force. It's not, and I don't mean that in the sort of vapid notion of like hopey, changey, like Obama kind of shit, which is fine, has its own place, right? But what I mean is a genuine hope. There's this idea of radical hope, which Fromm is of that tradition, but somebody else has written about radical hope in indigenous communities and talking about how indigenous communities maintain their sense of hope in the face of insurmountable odds, whether it's colonial oppression, violence from the state, economic desperation, community breakdown, all of it, right? But there's a book, I think came out like maybe in the 90s or the 2000s. It's called Radical Hope, and it's about how indigenous communities bind together through hope in trying to improve their lives. Because that's my big thing, is that people's lives will only get better if we collectively decide we want to and hope for it. I think part of one of the limitations of leaving things to states is that, the state will do that. I don't have to think about it, right? And I think that's a misguided notion. I think that often leaving things for the state just to do it without having active and democratic participation in the decisions that the state makes or in the decisions that a organized community makes leads to not just the breakdown of the system itself, but also just despotism.
Yeah.
And so you have to really recognize that. He writes a lot. He has a long quote. I won't read the whole thing, but basically he has a passage where he talks, he kind of anticipates this AI shit.
Okay.
But I'll leave you with the last sentence of the quote I pulled, which is like, one cannot help being suspicious that often the attraction of the computer man idea is the expression of a flight from life and from human experience into the mechanical and purely cerebral. This takes us back to Martin Hagland when we talked about, secular faith and spiritual freedom, right? This idea that there is a spiritual freedom and there is a secular belonging in knowing that one day you will die.
Yeah.
Life is limited, that we will not be here forever, that what makes life precious is its finitude. We've talked about this before. Fromm believed that too, and as do I. This idea of creating a computer man, that's what he would call it, the computer man in 1960. Right. Today we would call it the singularity. Or I think Sam Altman calls it the merge.
Yeah.
He has another term, right? But it's the merging of the biological and technological. Like humans can upload their consciousness to a computer and escape the finality of death. Now, I think this whole idea is complete bullshit. I don't think it's
nonsense.
It's absolute and complete nonsense. It'll never happen. First off, it's as I write, it's presumptuous to assume it's even possible given biological constraints. It's a form of dualism. It's saying that the brain and the mind and the brain
is separate from your body. Yeah,
two different things.
Yeah,
that essentially have a soul. It's not true. Like no, like
the
mind is the body. The body is the mind. They're two together. When my brain stops, so does my mind, and it does not come back.
Yeah, that's right.
That's what makes it special. That's what makes it precious. That's what makes every human being who has ever lived important. Is that they are each individual. They are the only manifestation that exists as that entity.
Yeah.
There's only one me and there's only one you. Yeah. Now that's a part of it, but it's also a recognition that we're all together, that humanity is one, that we are all tied together by the fact that we are biological creatures living in a physical universe with limitations. And that's the problem I have with this idea of singularity. First off, it's a religion. It's very religious. It's not, it's basically abandoning the real world and abandoning our real life and our real problems to do some science fiction shit that we don't even know could actually even happen.
Yeah.
And that's the part that drives me crazy. And he has a great quote about this at the end where he says, when the majority of men are like robots, then indeed there will be no problem in building robots who are like men.
Right.
It's like, if you build this system where everyone is just a cog in the machine, and no one has any autonomy or individuality or agency or democratic participation, you're going to build a system where men are basically robots. And that's how capitalism treats us.
Yeah, that's exactly what they want, right?
Yeah. And so I think that's really, I think people need to understand this. And this is something Paris Marx harps on a lot, is that these people believe in a religion. It's just not Christianity.
Yeah.
You know, you may have heard this before, but there was some guy who was like, oh yeah, I've been in the room with some Silicon Valley people. They really do think they're like descendants of pharaohs or some shit. They really genuinely believe that they're like above all of us.
I think there's that one guy who he wants to take over San Francisco or whatever it was, and do an ethnic cleansing of anybody who's not a fascist, and he's like one of those tech bros, who's got a $1 billion.
Was that Michael Schellenberger?
I can't remember the name. It could be, but you just go okay, so this is the kind of person that they are.
Yeah.
They believe they're superior, and everyone who doesn't agree with them or follow them is disposable.
Yes, basically, yeah. That's where the anti-democratic component comes in. I mean, the thing about a lot of these guys, whether it's Musk or Sam Altman who runs OpenAI or Bill Gates for that matter, it's like none of these people were elected. We didn't choose them to do any of this shit.
Yeah.
They're just doing it because they have a lot of money. And in our system, money means power. And that's, and this may not sound like I'm like a perfect Marxist, but a lot of times I think that the fundamental thing that motivates bad people is power. It's not necessarily sex, and it's not necessarily money. Freud thought it was sex. Marx thought it was money. I think it's all of that, but I also think it's power. I
think ultimately it's all the same thing, right? Money and power and sex, it's all there.
It's class power, right? And that's where it is Marxist, right? Like the vulgar Marxist would just say oh, it's just all about money. But it's no, but why is it about money?
Yeah.
Why is it foundationally about money? It's because of a class system, the workers and the owners.
Yeah.
And why is that dichotomy important? Because of the imbalance of power.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's manifested in the form of money and ownership, but it's about power.
Yep.
So that's the thing is we didn't elect these people to any of this. We didn't decide any of we didn't decide that we wanted to have them be a part of it. They are just doing what they want to do. And I think that's disastrous, not just for the environment, which obviously but also just for democracy in general. It's fundamentally anti-democratic to say we're going to leave this up to the tech oligarchs to do whatever they're going to do. And so in the latter part of the book, Fromm gives us the alternative. What's the alternative? Well, he says, machines and computers should become a functional part in a life-oriented social system and not a cancer, which begins to play havoc and eventually kills the system. Machines or computers must become means for ends, which are determined by man's reason and will. Right?
Yeah.
We should have an active democratic determination over how we use technology in our society, rather than it sort of being implemented and then we sort of have to deal with the implications later. That's what we've been doing so far. And the problem with doing it that way is that you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. Like, it's really hard to change something after it's already sort of been implemented. And we live in a culture where these advancements in technology are moving fundamentally faster than our ethical systems can come up with solutions for their problems. And that's basically because we don't include the average everyday person in the decision-making process. So Fromm says that's what you have to do. Basically, as we've harped for the last few years, and the mantra is socialism. Socialism, communism, whatever you want to call it, socialism. Democratic ownership and management of the means of production, period. That's what it is. And along all of that, he says that you have something he calls it humanistic management, where you have active, direct democratic participation of the participants in the organizing, planning, and implementation, distribution of goods within the system. That's right. I mean, you can call it humanized, humanistic management. That's great. I would just, you can call it that, like, specifically, broadly, it's just socialism. And he also talked about how we need to reimagine democracy and engage and improve the engaged role of the citizen. We do that through education, but we also do it through universal public services. We've harped on this before, right? Yeah. UBI is not enough. It's a good start, but it's not enough. UBI can often be a smokescreen for what they really want to do, which is to get rid of social democracy. They want to get rid of the broader social democratic protections that have been given people, that the people have worked very hard to fight for and to maintain over the last 100 years. Yeah. But he says that a person has an inalienable right to live, to which no conditions are attached, and which implies the right to receive the basic commodities necessary for life, the right to education and to medical care. Yeah. Provided this principle were accepted, if a man, woman, or adolescent could be sure that whatever he did in his material existence would not be in jeopardy, the realm of human freedom would be immensely enhanced. This is what we mean about negative freedom and positive freedom, right? Negative freedom is freedom from government encroaches upon your liberty, like freedom of speech, freedom of religion. But there's also positive rights, positive liberties, where you build a social system that ensures social rights that are not the government, being barred from doing something to you, but the government ensuring in a democratic way services for you. Yeah. And we can call it the government, we can call it the state, or we can just call it society, however you want to envision that, right? You can obviously envision stateless societies that do that. That's obviously with anarchism, but also you can think about anarcho-syndicalism, which we've talked a little bit about. We're going to do workers' councils. We're going to do Panachek's workers' councils later in the year. Cool. I'm more of like a council socialist. I really do believe that socialism doesn't mean when the government does stuff. Socialism is public and democratic ownership of the means of production distribution. That is socialism. Yeah. So, it's going beyond merely just providing social rights, although that's a revolution in and of itself and important. But you have to go beyond that and instill a sense of social solidarity, which he writes about too. And he talks about how if you can develop a system that has universal public services, that has humanistic management, that has worker ownership, that has democratic ownership, you can develop what he calls a cultural revolution that attempts to transform the spirit of alienation and passivity characteristic of technological society. Yeah. The aim of this transformation is a new man whose goal in life is being, not having and using, one who aims at the full development of his powers of love and reason and who achieves a new unity between thought and effect. This is what we're talking about. So technology should be used for human ends. It should be used for not just human ends, but for the ends of the biosphere, right? Because we belong to a broader system. Yeah. Not to be too chauvinistic, you have to recognize not just what we need as humans, but how we are as humans in relationship to the ecological system
Yeah.
in which we.
Something we're pretty bad at right now, but
Yeah.
yeah.
We're pretty terrible at it. And part of that is, again, it's because the ends of this system are not decided by us.
Yeah.
Decided by people who have much more money and power than we do and that are separated from us. That's part of the reason why when Elon Musk does crazy shit, people go, why is he so crazy? I'm like, because the dude is so divorced from regular people.
Yeah.
He doesn't interact with regular people.
No.
And so these people are only going to come up with, we talked about this in the Paris Marx episode when we talked about transportation, like Elon's really only just kind of solving problems that are really only for him.
Yeah,
it's
right.
not really for anybody else.
Yeah, and then he assumes he can universalize it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, Hyperloop. Well, you just reinvented the subway.
Yeah.
But you've made it more expensive and more dangerous.
Yeah.
Okay.
The subway, but worse. Good job.
And so what I would say is that as we go forward, I mean, I think the big thing to say is that there are some recommendations that we can do. There's some things I think we can do on a practical level. Some of them are small and some of them are big. So the first one I would say is fairly small, which is when possible, don't use Gen AI. I highly recommend it. Now, some of that is beyond us. Some things we do with Gen AI for the show. But
in a sense,
possible,
I was just going to say, every time you use ChatGPT, you bring them one step closer to destroying the company.
Mm-hmm. That's actually true. This is where these are really good examples of like the contradictions of capitalism, right?
Yeah.
Capitalism creates its own gravediggers where if you use it more, then it might undermine the company, but in using it more, it's actually bad for the environment. It's very tricky. Yeah. So that's fine. Having said that, and maybe this is easier said than done for me, but it's like, if you want to write something, just write it yourself. Don't try to use ChatGPT to do it. Write it yourself. And then have a human look at it and edit it for you. Just a thought, Yeah. The other thing is that I have a extension. I've downloaded an extension in Chrome that actually removes the AI garbage from search queries on Google.
Ah,
so when you type in on Google, it doesn't create that AI trash at the beginning.
Right.
It just gives me what Google used to be, which is good search results. I love it. Love it. It's what Google used to be. Remember when Google was good? Remember when Google was quick and good and gave you good, reliable information and not garbage? Yeah. And if you don't want to download the extension, one thing you can do, and I think this maybe goes across platforms, is you can type in a query and then minus AI at the end, and then that will also do it for you too.
Okay.
So that's something that I highly recommend people do. I think generative AI is a fad. I think that the bubble will burst, and at some point the market will sort of correct this. My hunch, I could be wrong, is that I don't think that, like, say, OpenAI will collapse, but I do think it will be bought by Microsoft.
Sure.
That's probably what I think will happen because Microsoft already has way more control of OpenAI than people think.
Yeah, that's right.
Having said that, though, it shouldn't happen, and that goes into my second idea, which is break big tech up. Enforce antitrust law in America. We have antitrust laws in the books. They're not perfect. They don't solve everything, but they're a good start. The ad business for Google should be different than its search business. That should be a different company. The Amazon Web Services should be a different company than the e-commerce company. It would actually instill real competition. And if people need any indication of how successful antitrust can be, think of the last time the United States broke up a corporation. It was AT&T in 1982, which arguably brought forth the internet revolution by breaking Ma Bell's stranglehold over telecommunications in the country. And then the last thing I basically argue for is advocating for economic and social democracy. I believe we need to move to a economic system in which people's needs are met, where we are becoming more in tune with the needs of our biosphere and ourselves, where we are a society that is less interested in owning shit and more interested in doing things. Instead of owning stuff, it's to be, not to have, in Erich Fromm's words. And there are real life examples of employee-owned enterprises. So we've talked before about the Mondragon Corporation in Spain, 70,000 employees strong, worker owners. And then my wife's own firm that she works for, BSA Life Structures, is based out of Indianapolis. It's an ESOP, which is an employee stock ownership plan.
Right.
She owns a part of the company that she works for. And so when the company does well, she does well. And the inequality within that system is democratically, as much as possible, democratically determined by the workers themselves. They elect who the CEO is going to be. They elect who the CFO is going to be. And yes, do those people make more money than, say, like my wife, who's a graphic designer? Yes, they do. But those disparities are democratically determined in a way that they aren't in other firms. Now, again, those inequalities
much more in line. Yeah.
They're not great, but they're better than the system we have now, where the average company, the average CEO makes 300 to 400 times more than the average worker,
right.
which is absurd.
Yeah.
So, imagine a system we had where we had worker-owned cooperatives, workers' councils, and democratic ownership, and you had social democratic provisions like housing, healthcare, food, medical care, education, all of it, right? And you could have socially responsible technological development, because I think personally we're living in an era which is deeply socially irresponsible.
Yeah.
Not just for the planet, which is like a huge part of it, but just also for democracy itself and for the overall like general well-being of most people. And so, in the end, I kind of write about we face a choice, one that Fromm anticipated many, many years ago. We can lead to a completely mechanized society, as he calls it, or we can put technique in the service of man's well-being. I believe that's the path, right? So humanism and hope, those are the two things that connect them together. Those are the key components.
For
so
sure.
As I would say in general, resist the allure of big tech. It often doesn't have your interests in mind.
Yeah.
And we're all guilty of this, right? I wrote this in Google Docs. I posted about it on Instagram. Like we are prisoners of this system, unfortunately. It's a lot harder to just say, I'm not going to be a part of it.
Right.
And I also don't think that's particularly helpful either. I think what is helpful is advocating for these services to be better. As I said to some of the attendees of my talk on Sunday, I said, one thing that would be great is if like Google just changed its model where you got all of its services for like $10 a month, and it got rid of ads. They didn't collect any data on you. It was encrypted. Like, wouldn't it be great if you could just pay like $10 a month to have Google and you could have Google without all the bullshit? It's like, that would be really nice, right?
Yeah.
And then because it's based on a subscription model, the subscribers have a say in how, so if Google does something we don't like, we can just pull their subscriptions. Like,
yep.
To me, it's not perfect, but that's a better way of doing it. And just be skeptical of these people. I mean, I think it's a lot easier to say that now than say 10 years ago, where everybody thought the sun set Silicon Valley's ass. But I think be more skeptical of them.
Yeah.
When Sam Altman goes on TV and talks about all the things that AI is going to do in the future, do not believe him.
Yeah.
When Elon Musk goes on TV and talks about all the things he's going to be doing, do not believe him. They are fundamentally charlatans.
Yep.
They are nothing more than carnival barkers. These people are selling you a bill of goods, and most of it is nonsense. And so just resist the allure of these people. They're not geniuses. They're not special. They're not unique. They are people who were very, very lucky by virtue of being, white men who came from power, or at the very least cozied up to power. And so I think we have to realize that and recognize that big tech is not the solution to our problem. It kind of is the problem.
Yep.
And so resisting it as much as possible is the way to go.
Yep, for sure. I think about like some of the, the stuff where we don't have consent, like we talked about in our techno-feudalism episode.
Yes.
We don't have consent in a lot of these things. And we're supposed to pretend that we have given our consent because we've signed off, clicked I agree or whatever at the end of a long fucking string of legal jargon. And we actually should have way more control over this than we actually do.
And that's what I'm saying. Am I saying it's going to be perfect? Heavens no.
No.
I really don't. Having said that, though, I do genuinely believe that we can try to change this a little bit for the good, and for the better.
Yep,
but
for
it's
sure.
really just a question of how to do it. So, and I think a lot of it just goes to fighting for democracy.
Yeah.
So that's what socialism is. It's fighting for a democratic system. I'm not trying to, so people, because people often, get crappy with us or whatever. It's like, oh, you want to recreate the Soviet Union? No, I don't. I really don't.
Like I
Like,
really don't. Yeah.
there's a lot of problems with that system, and it failed. Like it was a system that failed.
Yeah.
Why would I want to recreate something that didn't work? That's like,
Exactly.
so you have to learn and recognize there are many different ways of doing this.
Yeah.
Which is, I don't think it's my own political evolution on this stuff in the sense that, you know, I, I like the idea of worker cooperatives. I like the idea of workers' councils. I like the idea of participatory economics, like the Michael Albert idea,
Right.
like that we can build a system where people's needs can be met, where we're not destroying the environment, and we are a lot happier and better off. And we are more captains of our destiny than we would be otherwise. Because that's the other thing too, is that, like, on top of all the sort of ancillary problems of it, like climate change and social breakdown and all of that, the other problem is it just fundamentally it's not democratic.
Yeah.
It's not, and you know, I'm sorry, but like I'm going to hold on to that notion of democracy until I die. Like democracy is, in my opinion, the most radical idea and it's still radical. Like, and because I live in a country that is deeply undemocratic in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And so
Yeah.
the idea of people controlling their own destiny and working together to collectively decide what that destiny is still a very radical idea.
Yep.
And it's one that we should fight for and have hopeful, a hopeful projection for. And so, yeah. Sure. Definitely criticize big tech. Don't think that they have your interest in mind. They certainly don't. And they, I think it was the head of Microsoft in an interview where he was talking about all the different things that AI is going to do. And then the person just asked him, what's AI done for you right now? Like, what is it doing for you right now? And he said, well, it's helped me write emails.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, so we're boiling the planet and we are destroying any notion of economic fairness for you to write better emails. Like that's your end goal. It's pretty pathetic. So
better emails. Yeah.
Better emails, guys. Better emails, and it can't help freshman college essay writers. So,
yeah.
So just think about that and recognize that it's nonsense.
Yep. All right. Well, I guess what are we covering next time?
So next time we are. It's actually a good question. I kind of forgot. Give me a second. Let me look it up. Oh yeah. I think this will be very good post-election because I think there'll be a lot of grist for the mill with this book. I've wanted to talk about Adolph Reed for a long time, who was a big influence on Michael Brooks, and he wrote a book early 2000s, maybe late 90s, called Class Notes, and it's a primer on the problems within American democracy and how there are sort of structural forces and trends that have made it much harder for working people to organize in the United States. And so Adolph Reed was somebody who was very critical of certain leftist trends in the sense that he didn't believe that they necessarily were practical or whatever. But that will be what we'll cover next time is Class Notes by Adolph Reed Jr. I think for a lot of people, he was an influence. And I think he's somebody I've wanted to talk on the show for a while, partially because I've really wanted to talk more about like Black socialism. And that's something we're going to try to do more in the show is talking about Black perspectives on socialism, so next year we're going to do Franz Fanon, we're going to do Wretched of the Earth, we're going to do C.L.R. James, we're going to do different we're going to do Walter Rodney and sort of the Pan-African socialism, but Reed is a part of that. He's he's sort of the African-American perspective on American socialism. So I think cool. that, he's a contemporary of Cornel West and others. So that is what we'll be covering next time. I'm really looking forward to it. I think regardless of how the election shakes out, I think his discussion will be really, I think discussing this book will be very, very relevant about
sure.
The trends of the American left.
Right on. And I guess that just leaves, where can people find you?
So you can find me at my website, justinclark.org. It's right down there. The essay that our discussion was loosely based on tonight is called Hope in the Machine Towards a Humanistic Technology. That's up and available on my website. I will also make available all of my highlights and notes from The Revolution of Hope by Erich Fromm. So I'll send both of those documents to you, and we'll make those available in the show notes.
Perfect.
Definitely check it out. And then for the rest of the year, I'm just continuing to work on a variety of different things. I'm still, it's very appropriate because I got my shirt on. I'm still working on my sort of American Idiot retrospective essay.
Nice.
I'll get that out. I'm hoping to get that out before the end of the year. And then, so I've got a lot of ideas kind of in the pipeline and hoping that we can do more with. But definitely check out my recent essay and then check out the notes that I made for the book. And then, as always, please consider becoming a patron, patreon.com/skeptical leftist. Corey has been doing gangbusters on a lot of this different content, whether it's the live stream we did on the election, obviously read reviews, the interview episodes that he does. They're really, really interesting stuff. Definitely check it out. If you become a patron, you're going to get access to the pregame and the postgame of read reviews and all the other shows. And you'll be supporting the critical work that we're doing here. So
sure.
Definitely consider becoming a patron and get all that extra bonus content.
It's always appreciated. And I guess with that, I just want to say thanks to everybody who joined us in the chat. There was a little bit going on there, mostly from Some Random Geek.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
A couple people joined us pretty close to the end, but make sure to check out the whole episode. I hope you enjoy it, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, folks, that's all for now. Thanks for watching or listening. Remember to share this show with your friends or on the social media site that you use the most. Thank you to everyone who supports this show on Patreon. I really appreciate it, and it helps me keep the power on. Thanks to my top patrons, Damian Marie at Hope, Some Random Geek, Justin Clark, Dan F. Smith, and Lisa Glass. And thank you to my new patrons. You can stay tuned for the list of patrons at the end to see your name listed. If you aren't a patron and want to contribute, you can do that at patreon.com/skepticalleftist, or you can send a one-time donation to buymeacoffee.com/skepticallefty. I also have a Substack where you can subscribe for free or you can donate per month. And lastly, you can get a paid subscription on Spotify that will give you the same access to bonus content and extra long episodes. If you can't contribute financially, then I would like on YouTube or a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or one of the podcast review sites like Podchaser would be great. If you want to find more from me, then make sure to check out the show notes for links to all my stuff, or check out my link tree. It's linktr.ee/skepticalleftist. That's where you can find all of my social media spaces and communities. You can also email me at mindofaskepticalleftist@gmail.com. Thanks so much for listening or watching. Make sure to leave a comment on the video, join your local org, print off some posters or pamphlets, and spread the propaganda. Also, stick around for a clip from this episode's post-show chat. Space looking like reddish, but we're still in the south and the east here, so like Texas is basically leaning Trump.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't understand why it would ever be winner take all.
Yeah, that's really the challenge. I mean, and I think part of it is that it keeps certain states entrenched, right? So like, if you move to a more of a winner-take-all system or you move to ranked choice voting, then, certain parties wouldn't have total control over certain states, right? So like, a state, like a good example is say like a state like my own, Indiana. Like if we move to a more proportional system, like then it wouldn't be so deep red.